As the first rays of dawn broke over the horizon, the world bathed in golden light, Jesus stood at the foot of a towering mountain, his gaze steady on the summit. He turned to his disciples with a serene smile and said, "Today, we climb not only to reach the top but to understand the choices that shape our lives." The disciples had always followed Jesus with faith, but today there was an unusual air of anticipation. The mountain loomed above them, its peak shrouded in mist, hiding what lay ahead. They sensed that the journey they were about to embark upon was more than just a physical climb. It was a spiritual ascent that would challenge their hearts and minds. As they began their climb, the early morning light filtered through the trees, casting long shadows along the path. The air was crisp and cool, and for a while the path was gentle. It wound through green meadows and fields of wildflowers, the sweet scent of the blossoms lifting their spirits. Birds chirped in the branches above, and the disciples felt at ease, talking amongst themselves about the teachings they had heard from Jesus the day before. But soon the landscape began to change. The path grew steeper, the soft ground giving way to rocks and uneven terrain. The climb required more effort, and the disciples found themselves straining with each step. The air became thinner, and the trees thinned out, leaving them exposed to the elements. The sun, once comforting, now beat down on them, making the climb more difficult. The disciples' conversations grew quiet as they focused on the task ahead. Each step became harder than the last, and they began to feel the weight of the journey. It was not just their physical strength that was tested, but their faith and determination. The mountain seemed endless, and the disciples wondered why the path was so difficult. Yet, through it all, Jesus walked ahead of them. His steps were steady, his pace unchanging. He did not seem affected by the steep incline or the rough ground beneath his feet. His calm presence reassured the disciples, and though the climb was difficult, they pressed on, knowing that they were following someone who understood both their struggles and their hearts. As they ascended higher, the disciples began to notice other travelers along the path. Some were sitting by the wayside, exhausted and discouraged, unsure of whether they could continue. Others had turned back, their faces filled with regret and frustration. The disciples exchanged glances, recognizing in those travelers the doubts and fears they themselves had faced at various points in their lives. They too had known moments when the road ahead seemed too hard, when the temptation to turn back felt overwhelming. After several hours of difficult climbing, the group finally reached a plateau. The disciples, exhausted and breathless, were grateful for the chance to rest. They gathered around Jesus, who stood at the edge of the plateau, gazing out at the landscape below. The view was extraordinary. From this height, they could see roads and paths winding through the valleys far below. Some of the roads were wide and straight, cutting confidently through the landscape. Others were narrow and winding, disappearing into forests or over distant hills. The disciples were struck by the sight, for they realized that these roads symbolized the choices people made in life, the paths they chose to follow, the directions they took, and the destinations they reached. Jesus, with a quiet authority, began to speak. "Look below at the roads before you," he said, his voice calm but commanding. "Each road represents a choice, a direction in life. Some paths are wide and well-traveled, filled with people who promise you comfort, success, and ease. Others are narrow, steep, and difficult, with few who choose to walk them. But it is not the appearance of the path that matters, it is where the path leads." The disciples listened intently, their hearts open to the lesson Jesus was about to teach. They sensed that his words would carry deep meaning, not just for them but for all who would come after them. "There was once a man who stood at a crossroads," Jesus continued, his voice rich with wisdom. "Before him lay two paths. The first was broad, smooth, and crowded with people who promised him wealth, comfort, and security. It seemed the obvious choice, a road where success was guaranteed by following the crowd. The second path was narrow, winding, and difficult, with few travelers. It was a path filled with uncertainty and challenge. The disciples could easily picture the man standing at the crossroads, his heart torn between the easy, well-traveled road and the narrow, difficult one. They had all faced such moments in their own lives, times when they were tempted to take the easier route, even though something deeper inside urged them to choose the harder, more uncertain path. The man hesitated, Jesus said, his mind filled with questions. Why should I choose the harder road? He thought. Why not take the path that promises me comfort and success? And so he stepped onto the wide road. At first the journey seemed easy. The road was smooth, and he was surrounded by others who reassured him that he had made the right choice. The disciples could understand the man's reasoning. Who wouldn't choose the easier path if given the chance? They had all, at one time or another, chosen the path of least resistance, thinking it would lead them to happiness. But as the man continued along the wide path, Jesus said, he began to notice something troubling. Though he was surrounded by people, he felt increasingly alone. The voices that had once promised comfort and success began to fade, and the further he walked, the emptier he felt. He realized that the wide road was taking more from him than it was giving. His joy, his peace, his sense of purpose. The man had gained the world, but he had lost his soul. The disciples were silent, their hearts heavy with the weight of the man's story. They understood the man's growing despair. They had all experienced moments when they had chosen the easier path, only to find themselves lost and disconnected from their true purpose. One day the man stopped in the middle of the road. Jesus continued, his voice filled with compassion. He looked up to the sky and cried out, "Is this all there is? Where is the peace I was promised?" In that moment of desperation he heard a voice, soft yet strong, speaking to his heart. Said, "Turn back. This is not the path that will bring you peace. Seek the narrow road, though it is difficult, for it is there that you will find what you are truly seeking." The disciples felt a surge of emotion as Jesus spoke these words. They understood the man's longing for something deeper, something more meaningful. They had all felt that same longing at different points in their lives. The desire for peace, for purpose, for something that transcended the fleeting comforts of the world. With great effort, the man turned back, Jesus said. The journey was long and difficult, for he had walked far down the wide road. But he did not give up. He found the narrow path, the road he had once dismissed as too hard. And as he walked, he discovered that, though the path was steep and filled with challenges, each step brought him closer to peace. He no longer felt alone, for he had found God walking beside him. On that narrow road, the man found the purpose and fulfillment that had eluded him on the wide path. The disciples were deeply moved by the story. Some of them had tears in their eyes, not from sadness, but from a profound sense of hope. They understood now that the true path to peace and purpose was not always the easiest one. It was often the road that required the most faith, the most perseverance. Jesus, seeing the understanding in their eyes, looked at them with love. "You will all face such choices in your lives," he said softly. "There will be times when the easy path will call to you, when the promise of comfort and security will seem too tempting to resist. But remember this, the easy road often leads to emptiness, while the harder road, though filled with trials, leads to true peace and fulfillment." The disciples nodded, their hearts full of understanding. They had each walked their own paths of faith, some easier, some harder, and they had learned that the journey to true peace was often the one that required them to trust in something greater than themselves. Jesus stepped closer to them, his voice filled with warmth and reassurance. When you come to the crossroads of life, do not be afraid to take the narrow road. It may be difficult, and it may require sacrifice, but it is there that you will find me. I will walk with you, guide you, and give you the strength to overcome every obstacle. Trust in me, and you will never walk alone. The disciples felt an overwhelming sense of peace wash over them. They understood now that no matter how difficult the road ahead might be, they would never be alone. Jesus would be with them, guiding them, offering his wisdom and love with every step. But Jesus had not finished his lesson yet. He gestured to a smaller path off to the side of the plateau, one that seemed even steeper and rockier than the others. It wound upward into the mist, its destination unclear. "Look at this road," he said, his voice gentle but firm. "This path is the one less traveled. Few take it because it requires not only faith but also perseverance. It leads to the highest point, the place where you will find not just peace but joy, purpose, and the fullness of life. It is the path that calls those who are willing to trust in me completely." The disciples gazed at the path, feeling both awe and trepidation. They had already climbed so far, and the thought of taking an even steeper, more difficult road was daunting. But they also knew that Jesus was calling them to something greater, something beyond the ordinary. "Many will choose the easier roads," Jesus said, "and they will find a certain measure of comfort and success. But the greatest rewards come to those who are willing to take the hardest path. It is there that you will find the deepest connection with God, the truest understanding of who you are, and the greatest fulfillment of your purpose. It is the road of faith, of love, of sacrifice, and it is the road that I call you to walk." The disciples felt the weight of his words. They had followed Jesus through many challenges, but they knew that the journey ahead would require even more of them. More faith, more courage, more surrender. Yet, in their hearts they also knew that they could not turn back. The call of the narrow road was too strong, too compelling. Jesus smiled at them, his eyes filled with love. "Do not be afraid," he said. "I will be with you every step of the way. And when the road becomes too difficult, when you feel that you cannot go on, remember that I am your strength. Lean on me and I will carry you." In life, we all face moments at the crossroads, where the path forward is unclear. The world may offer us wide, easy roads filled with promises of comfort and success, but it is often the narrow, difficult road that leads to the greatest fulfillment. Do not be afraid to take the harder path, for it is there that you will find your true purpose, your deepest peace, and your connection with God. When you come to the crossroads, trust in the voice of wisdom, and know that you are never alone in your journey. Jesus walks with you, guiding you, strengthening you, and leading you to the fullness of life. This is end of the story. Comment amen if you believe in Jesus' blessings. Please like this video and subscribe this channel for more Jesus story like this. May the God watch over you.